Well, hello, guys. Welcome to the second episode of Tales from the Triptych. And tonight we are talking all about a very special topic near and dear to my heart, Petroliana, and more specifically, oil cans. So I'm so glad that you guys are all tuning in to be part of this show. We're going to learn a lot and see a lot of cool vintage eye candy, so you want to stick around. Patrick and Nate are here with me, and they're going to be my wingmen in the chat. And I'm so curious to see who we have here tonight.
Hello, Katie. Hello, Patrick.
Hello.
Hello, Poodle. How are you? Hello, Peterson. Hello, Diana. Little Vintage Me 64. I know you're having a social media break at the moment. Thanks so much for joining us. Edward. Hi, Edward. So glad you came along, buddy. Thank you. And who else have we got? Pamela Blanchard, Mrs. Blanchard Jacobson. Thank you for coming. We have also Princess. Hello, Tippy Winks. Great to see you as well. Sam's here. Hi, buddy. Thanks for coming. Who else, Patrick? Can you see?
Looks like we've got Jean Marie's coming in to see us, and Tammy Renee's coming in from the south. So thanks for joining us, Tammy.
Hi, Tammy.
Chad coming in from the Maryland, from the Terp State. Angela coming down from down the road from me, representing Illinois. And do we say hi to Tim from Canada? I think that might be our first or maybe only Canadian in the house.
Hi, Tim. How you going, buddy?
Christina
Brian's
Taylor,
here as well.
Deb Sherman.
Jan Goodwin is here. Hello, Jan.
Hey, guys.
Christina Taylor. Hi, Christina.
Thanks so much for all you guys joining us. Sorry if we miss anybody.
Yes, the chat always moves fast.
Yep. Deb Sherman.
Jerry from My Flea Market Treasures. Missed her.
Taminator. Tammy Renee Walker is here. Thanks for coming, Tammy. And Gina Marie as well. Thank you for coming.
Brian Hans coming in from Chicagoland.
Mary R. Hi, Mary. And Deanna Church. Hello, Deanna, love. Kerry's here. Kerry, KCATX is here.
And so good to see all of you guys in the chat tonight. Thank you again so much for tuning in to this show on Petroliana. I think we should go ahead and get started because, as you can see up at the top, I have quite a few tabs open, so I have a lot of fun things that I want to show you tonight. And I want to start off with going all the way back to 1961. Now, this was a time in the early days of gas stations when attendants would do just more than fill up your tank. They would often clean your windshield and check your oil, too. And if you needed new oil, they would grab a metal can and add oil to your car's engine. So let's see what some of these oil advertisements were from 1961. Who remembers the Sinclair dyno? I think I do. This one is lots of fun. Let's take a look.
It's time to winterize. And at Sinclair, that means check. Lubricate, check. Transmission and differential, check. Hoses for leaks, check. Fan belt, check. Drain radiator. And put in Sinclair antifreeze. Change to Sinclair XXX, the multi-grade motor oil, with nickel added to armor plate your engine against winter wear. Finally, fill up with Sinclair Dyno for fast winter starts. Worry about winter? What for? You've got Sinclair winterizing. It's time now, winterize, at the sign of Sinclair. At Sinclair, we care about you, about your car.
Oh, what a great advertisement for Sinclair oil. I think that is absolutely fantastic. Now, that was such a unique time in our history when you would actually go to a filling station and it was just more than getting gas and you didn't pump your own gas. So a lot of you guys might be wondering, what is Petroliana? Because that's probably a new term to a lot of folks out there. Patrick and Nate, do you know what Petroliana is?
Well, I do because you told me. So I have a little bit of a head start.
Well,
it's really, oh, no, go ahead. I'm assuming it's regarding collectible items from petrol stations and to do with gas and petrol and things like that.
Exactly, Nate. You hit it right on the head. Petroliana are antiques related to gas stations and the oil business. And it's really a collecting area that's focused primarily on great graphics and advertising. And a lot of these gas stations and oil companies are not around anymore. So when you find some of these old Petroliana pieces, they can be quite valuable. But today we're going to take a look at a little snippet of some of the things that you can collect in Petroliana. And I want to show you this collector here. He's got an amazing collection. Now, this, I believe, was featured on HGTV Network, and the guy's name is Bill. And his dad used to own an oil station, and so did his grandfather. They had them across the street from each other. And then he opened up a gas station and has been collecting gas items ever since. So here's a little snippet of what you can collect when you get into the wonderful world of Petroliana.
Bill's is one of the top collections of gas station memorabilia in the nation, much of which he amassed before the current collecting boom, when he'd hop in his truck and scour the country, visiting old garages, swap meets, and junk stores, along the way filling his trailer with anything and everything filling station related. And I do mean everything.
Wow, take a look at that, folks.
Oh, Bill, this is incredible. I can't believe the number of things you have and the condition they're in. Whew. And a lot.
So that's just a little snippet of some of the items that you can collect when you get into Petroliana. Now, we're talking today more specifically about oil cans. And there's actually a lot of different types of oil cans that are quite fascinating when you get into the world of oil and Petroliana. And some are more desirable than others. And there's some really unique shapes. So I want you to see a little snippet of this gentleman's collection and really learn some of the different shapes when it comes to collecting oil cans. Some are earlier and some are a little bit later. And this guy is going to show you a rocker can. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute by a rocker can. But rocker cans are early. The earliest form of oil cans started in the 1900s, and they were either square or box-like. And then, of course, then they had the rockers as well. So this guy is going to show you his rocker can, and it's pretty amazing.
Quartz back, we'll start grabbing some of these others. If we want to go really early, we can get back to some of our rocker cans. These are great pieces. They were branded on the fronts. They're called a rocker can. They had a spout on this side, and you could literally rock them out, or rock them over and dump the oil out. Hence the term rocker can. Very hard to find, very early cans, especially if they've still got good graphics on them. 5-gallon square can. This is a Hudson Motor Oil Kansas City can. Beautiful graphics with the planes and the truck on it and the race cars. But really a cool looking can. There again, not your typical oil can, but definitely a great piece. A couple of early square ones. I believe these are 10-pound square cans. This was a grease can on the Anarco and a Mobil Oil Arctic Gargoyle can. These are also both early cans, but and they're again not your typical can, but great looking oil cans. Cool graphics, nice colors, neat stuff.
And it is neat stuff indeed. So let's take a look at some of these early oil cans. I really want to talk about some of these. Yes.
Can I jump in with a question? There was a comment in the chat from Chad, and I had the kind of a related question. That rocker can, I'd never heard of one. Chad had never heard of one. The one he was showing was 5-gallon. Do you know, does that rocker can come in other sizes, or is that what they were, 5-gallon, or were they even larger or smaller?
I believe 5-gallon was the standard for the rocker cans, but of course, oil cans did come in a variety of sizes, and you'll find them in 1 quart, which is kind of the common ones that we're all familiar with, 2-gallon, 5-gallon, 10-gallon, and sometimes even larger, which is those ginormous barrels. So you will find them in different sizes when you're out looking, but I believe 5-gallon was standard for all of the rocker cans.
Okay, thanks.
Great question there. Now, I want to talk a little about some of the early cans. Now, these are the earliest form of oil cans. Of course, before oil cans, they had bottles, and that's a whole nother area of collecting. You can get into collecting oil bottles, and that's a whole nother subject for a different day. But this is one of the earliest oil cans, and you will see that it's early because it's got the gargoyle little design here for mobile, and it's square. So some of the earliest cans were square, as you see in this listing. And of course, it does command a pretty high price tag because of its age and the fact that you just don't see a lot of these. So this one is a 1/2 gallon motor oil can, and it is in the square form. You're also going to run into cans like this. Now, this is an unusual early 2 gallon motor oil
Katie,
can. Yes.
Before you go on, that gargoyle can that you just showed, is that standard condition that you would see cans in these days, or would you consider that to be quite rough?
That's a great question, Nate. And yes, this is kind of the standard for a lot of these oil cans. We'll talk about condition further on as we go into the show, but you do typically find these in pretty rough shape. One, because the companies that had these oil cans would throw them away. As you saw in the first video with the Sinclair oil, you saw the gentleman puncture the hole into the oil can, pour the oil into the car, and then they would throw away the can because there wasn't any use for the can afterwards. It was already punctured, and there was really no lid to reuse the cans when you get into those 1 quart cans particularly. So they would just throw them away. And that's why a lot of these are becoming so hard to find, because they were thrown away, and also the companies don't exist anymore. We'll talk about polygas in a little bit when I get to that can, but polygas was only around for a very short time. So anything with polygas is going to be very rare and very collectible. And when you get into mobile, like you're seeing this can here, it's early. So you're not going to find a lot of these square cans. You see some of the later mobile cans with the shield, and I'll show you one in just a minute. But great question there, Nate.
Right.
I want to talk more about some of these early cans because these are the ones that you're going to have the hardest time finding. A lot of them just don't exist. And again, the companies were around for a short period of time. Now, you can do a lot of research on some of the early companies if you want, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole you can go down. That's quite interesting, but it's also hard to find some of these early manufacturers because they weren't tracked as well. Even though we have the wonderful world of Google, it's still hard sometimes researching some of these early companies. But this is Liberty Mobile Oil Can, and it is an unusual 2 gallon square can. I usually see the more rectangular 2 gallon motor oil cans. This one is square, and it is just pretty spectacular. Look at the graphics. But you'll notice it still has dents and dings in it because of its age. And, you know, these things just didn't survive. And it's still at an auction sold for $241.
Wow.
So, yes, these cans can be worth some money, and they can go for a pretty penny. Like I said, reiterating that they're hard to find, and people want them, and they want the early ones. And this one is pretty cool with those graphics. So that's a square can.
Now, you mentioned that they were often or usually found in rectangular, but the rectangular are also the older style too, right?
Yes, the rectangulars are older. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the dates for these cans. When you get into the 1900s, you've got the early cans being square and box-like the cans that we've just looked at. This can here that you're seeing is more rectangular, but it is one of the earlier cans. And then we saw the rocker cans. Those are early as well. And then they started going to round cans. Now, round cans had a soldered lead seam down the side, and I'll show those here in just a second. And they were used until the early 40s. And then because of the metal shortage during the war, they went to something called paper quarts, which really were metal lids with metal bottoms and a paper middle. And those cans were used until the late 50s. And then they started switching to the plastic cans or plastic containers in the 60s, which was really a precursor to today's plastic oil bottles that we're all familiar with. So they really went through some changes in the can shape. And that's a great way to date these old cans, is by the can shape. because if you see some of these cans like you're seeing here with the Ford motor oil, that's an earlier shape. So you're not going to see that, in the 50s. So this definitely helps you date it. Now, you can also date cans by the can manufacturer, and it's kind of like typewriter ribbon tins. A lot of the big can manufacturers that made typewriter ribbon tins also made oil cans. Now, I'll show you in just a minute when we get to one of the rocker cans. I'll show you some of the manufacturers of those cans. Not all of the early cans are marked with the manufacturer, but sometimes you can find them. And you'll find makers like the American Can Company, Columbia Can, National Can Co., St. Louis Can, St. Louis Tin, and Sheet Metal Company. Those are some of the companies that made these early cans. And when you find those manufacturers on a can, that can help you date it too, because some of these manufacturers are not around for a long period of time. Now, American Can is one of the #1 can manufacturers in the world. They are the largest. And then, of course, there's National Can, St. Louis Can. Those are not around anymore. So that kind of can help you date cans too. Now, you can also judge. Yes.
Sorry, other than helping you date by the age, does the actual manufacturer have any indication or any impact on price? So like if the Ford motor oil can you're showing, one was made by National Can, another one was made by American Can, would one be more valuable than the other, or is it just based on age?
That's a great question. I think there are people that collect certain manufacturers of the tin cans, but most people are interested in the graphics themselves. So I wouldn't say particularly that they affect price. I would say more of the rarity of the can, the graphics on the can, and the age affect its value. And we'll talk more when we get into the condition. That condition really doesn't matter on some of these cans when you get into the price points, because as you can see, as we'll go through the show, you'll notice that a lot of the cans are in pretty rough shape, like that early mobile can that we saw. And it's just that they're so rare that people will buy them in any condition just to have them in their collection.
So this, Katie, is a can that's put out by the Ford Motor Company. Are there other manufacturers of cars that had their own brands of oil like this?
As far as I know, there aren't. I've just seen the Ford motor oil companies. A lot of the big oil companies actually had their own cans, and they really put their graphics on them as a way to market themselves. Because when you go to a filling station, and you got, Gulf oil, that was really another touch that would add to the whole Gulf experience and why you would maybe keep going back to that filling station. This one's very early. So this is the beginning sort of cars and Ford motor oil. So I'm assuming maybe other companies did, but typically I don't see them. This one's Ford. And as you can see, it's very early. I've never seen another one. And you'll notice here, I find this interesting, is the description says it's hand soldered. And that also is a great way to kind of date things, because early cans were made by hand. Before they had machinery, people would hand solder all the cans together. And I don't remember now, but I want to say that they had at least 7 employees making so many cans per hour, but they would hand solder them together. And you can see the hand soldered marks in this can here.
Cool.
Katie, really quick question, because you're showing all these on eBay. Michelle at Mermaid Cove actually came up with a interesting question. Is there limitations on being able to ship these? Given that there may be some obviously they've been used up, but unless you've washed them, if there's residue or anything inside with the old oil, is there any restrictions that you know of about shipping?
That's a great question. You can ship these as long as they're empty, even though there's a little bit of oil in the bottom. I've never run into any problem. I buy all of my cans primarily through eBay and other auction sites, and I don't have any problems with them shipping. But you do need to make sure that they're empty. You cannot ship a can full of oil through the mail. Of course, that is something when you get into collecting that a lot of people love to find the unopened cans full of oil. It really does make their value go up if you can find a new old stock can. And really the best way to buy those, if you're wanting to add them to your collection, is to go to physical oil can and Petroliana swap meets. And there are quite a few swap meets across the country. Of course, when things open back up, you can go and do all kinds of Petroliana type shows, and they will have oil cans there that might be full that you could buy. And then you're just driving with them. You're not, shipping them through the mail. So this can here is an antique Marathon motor oil can. And I wanted to point this out as well with these cans. Notice the spout here. A lot of collectors really do enjoy the spout when you find different shapes of spouts. And this is one of those earlier pour spouts that you'll find on cans. Sometimes these are rusted off or they're not attached anymore, so that can affect value just a little bit. But of course, if the graphics are really cool and the can is just impossible to find, it doesn't matter at that point. But this can here is another version of an early square boxier can that you would see. And this is the old Marathon logo. So I don't know if you're seeing that up close here, but you can see the girl running, and that's before Marathon changed its logo. So there are several different versions of logos that you'll find, and that's another great way to date cans as well, is if you find an early Marathon logo versus a new Marathon logo, the Marathon that we're all used to, then you know that you've got something that's older as well. So you notice the rust on this. I mean, this can is in pretty rough shape, but the graphics are still amazing. I mean, you don't find this can. It's not around. So when you get into that kind of thing, the current bid for this, you can see it on an auction, is $102.50. Now, these are not solds, but in my experience, looking up these cans and collecting these cans, that is really what some of these cans go for. So if you're ever at a barn sale or you're in a basement somewhere and someone's got some rusty old oil cans, don't be afraid to pick them up, because you might be surprised how early they are, or how rare they are, or how desirable they are, because people want some of these early cans and they are happy to pay this price, even in this condition, because they're just so hard to find. So this is a great example of another early can. Now this can is pretty cool.
Katie, a couple of questions in the chat. Jay Goodwin's asked where you keep your oil can collection, and Teophone has asked, do collectors wash the cans to get rid of any residue, or does that affect the value?
That is a wonderful question. So I actually just collect cans, and I store them pretty much in a little vignette or display within my apartment. I just stack them together or put them in a display. I've got some that have little tins sitting on top of them. I mean, the kind of cool thing about these oil cans is, like this one, it's got a little ledge on the top. So it's kind of like perfect for built-in displays of all kinds of things. And if you collected other things related to cars and Petroliana and you had something that you want to display, you could certainly display them on top of the little ledge of the can. Now, as far as cleaning cans, that is a really, really good question, because these get pretty filthy. And as you can imagine, oil gets pretty caked around the spout. Usually when I find oil cans like this one, they have just tons of built up oil and gunk. And it does help if you can clean the cans. It doesn't really affect its value as long as you're not rubbing off the graphics. And that is something that you have to be careful about. But there is several cleaners that you can use. And one of the cleaners that I found extremely helpful it's called McDavid's. I'll put it down in the chat below. But it's like a paste, and you can use it and it will clean off excess oil and gunk, and it basically will just make the can gunk free and take some of that oil away, which does help. It might also polish it up a bit, because it will take off some of this dirt that you're seeing around the can. So that does help if you can kind of clean it up. Of course, with the rust, sometimes there's just nothing that you can do. The rust is there and you can't really get that off. And I wouldn't try, because I do think that sometimes the rust adds to its patina and its interest, and it truly shows its age. Now, I'm someone that likes a lot of rust on things, but I know that's not for everybody. And you'll have two different kinds of collectors. I mean, you will have collectors that like the mint, mint, and then you'll have people like me that I'm happy with a little bit of rust and dents and dings. Of course, when you have collectors that want the mint, that will, drive up the value, because if they're wanting to buy something that's rare and they'll only buy it in mint, well, they're going to probably pay a couple of $1,000 if it's something that's just not out there.
This is related to Tim's question about cleaning. One of the other questions that's coming up is if they're not cleaned, or if you're not cleaning out the interior, and I don't know, I've not been around them that much. I don't collect them myself. Do they smell oily, or do they smell like petrol? Is that something that if you build up a collection, is that something you will smell regularly?
Yeah, it is. And that's something that I've found with cans I've bought, especially when you get them in the mail. The box just reeks of old oil. And I actually had to throw away a box I got recently. I got 2 cans, and I'll show one of them in just a minute. 2 cans, and they just smelled. And, cleaning them off a bit did help, but you will get some of that oil smell. So that is something to consider when you get some of these old oil cans. You can't reuse any of the boxes. If you're going to resell and reuse the boxes, I wouldn't recommend reusing a box that an oil can came in.
Katie,
So
Jeannie has asked, do we know the most expensive can ever sold or auctioned?
that is a great question, and I do not, but I am going to show you a really expensive can coming up in just a minute that's just incredibly hard to find, and I'll show you the current auction price. Now, this is the vintage Texaco motor oil can, and this one's early. It's one of those square boxy type cans, and you'll see here that this has a unique spout. This spout actually swivels, and that's something that is another type of spout that people are really interested in when it comes to oil cans. So you've got some of those early pour spouts, and then you have these swivel spouts, and people do like collecting different oil cans with different spouts. And this is an early Texaco can. Very, very cool. And I love that green graphic.
Just as a clarification, you're talking about the swivel spout. Is that something that would be added after they opened the can, or is that something that was kind of tucked in during transit and then spun out to use?
So this would have come on the can, and this would have swung into the inside here, and then you would swing it out to use it, if that makes sense.
I love this beer bottle used as to show the size.
Yes, I like that too. It does help a lot when sellers do that, because it is hard sometimes to know the size of these cans. And this one's a 1/2 gallon. Now, this is another great example of an early can, and this is getting really expensive. And this is a great website, antiqueadvertising.com. They actually have a whole list of items that have sold in auctions, and they will showcase some of the top selling oil cans. And this is one that's just amazing. It's Trop Arctic Auto Oil, and it's got some amazing graphics on it. Now, this one sold in an auction for $948.75.
Wow.
This is very early, and not only is it early because of its box shape, but notice the handle here. This is an earlier, thinner metal handle, and you'll find these on earlier cans. Some of the later cans have a thicker handle, and these have this little early, I don't know what you would call that, but like a flip top handle, because the handle kind of folds down flush versus sticking out. So this is just a really amazing can, and you can see that spout too. And this spout would have come on the can. Of course, it is missing its lid, but even with all the rust and patina that you see on it, it's still sold for $948. But the graphics are great, just a great can. Now, this is one of the most expensive cans I've ever seen, and this is a buy it now. So you can buy it now if you really, really want an early rocker can. But this is a 1920s early rocker can, and this just has some incredible graphics. This is a motor oil can featuring the Uncle Sam hat. And of course, this kind of goes into areas of cross collecting too, because there are people that like motor oil cans, but there's also people that maybe collect 4th of July. and they want an early example of like an Uncle Sam hat graphic. There are people, if you go back to this can, that collect things primarily with cars on them. So you kind of have some cross collectability with these oil cans as well, because not only are you collecting for the oil can collectors and the Petroliana folks, but you might get into other areas of collecting that people say, oh, I like airplanes or I like cars. Well, those are big motifs on oil cans. So this is something that I find really amazing. And I just pointed this out because you can see that this can is in really rough shape, but considering it's from the 1920s, and this is just one that you do not find, this red hat oil, they're not around. It totally is worth the $3,799.
Oh, that's interesting, Katie, because I was going to ask if you saw that price and thought he's got to be dreaming to think he's going to get that. So you think that's a reasonable price for that piece?
I do. I mean, I've been looking and collecting oil cans for a couple of years now, and I have seen prices all over the place. But if you do research on one particular can, because you're really interested in it and you'd like to find that can, you'll start to see as you look that that's just the going rate, and you realize that, yeah, they're totally worth it because they're so scarce. That's the thing. I mean, these were thrown away. They weren't saved, unlike the typewriter ribbon tins that were saved because, people could actually reuse them. They could put paper clips in them or safety pins or whatever. These kinds of things, I mean, you can't really reuse an oil can because of the oil inside. It's messy and it's dirty and they just got chalked. So really, if you find these, they're pretty special. And you're going to find a lot of these, in basements and barns and that kind of thing. I don't think these are the things that you typically see every day at your local antique mall.
So one of the questions that's popping up or comments is everyone's saying they need to start paying attention to garages and estate sales. What would you say? I mean, you're not going to find something like this probably sitting in a 1960s ranch. So what was the era that you said this was the 20s? What would you say is the focused era for the valuable, the high value items that are collected?
I think pretty much all oil cans have a high value of collectability unless it's a common can. So it's really rarity. And I think it doesn't matter. I mean, age does matter some because there are people that like these early cans. Like maybe there's someone that just collects rocker cans or someone that just collects the early square cans. But when you get into oil cans in general, there are some that are just hard to find. And it doesn't matter what era they're from. People just want them because of the graphics. And so I think it really does matter, the rarity, the graphics, and what people are looking for and what they collect. And so basically these oil cans in general were around from the 1900s to the 70s. Anything after the 70s, they've moved to those plastic oil bottles that we're used to seeing today. So anything, pre-1970s is going to be pretty collectible. But of course, there are some, and I'll show in just a minute, that you're going to run into quite a bit. Capital Oil is one that you see a lot. That can, it comes up. I mean, it's still worth around $50 to $80, but you're going to see that can more often than you will see a rocker can. So hopefully that helps a little bit when it comes to values. This is another rocker can. And this one has some better graphics on it, but it still has some dents and dings. And I wanted to show you this can because it's pretty special. It's actually marked on the can. And if you'll see here, this is manufactured by the St. Louis Can Company. Now, the St. Louis Can Company is not around anymore. And if you actually go do research on it, there isn't much research for the St. Louis Can Company. You can barely find any information on this. Now, they are turning the St. Louis Can Company building into loft apartments. And that is a great tip if you're looking to research some of these early can manufacturers. You can kind of go on real estate websites and see if you can find the old buildings being converted into lofts, and they can tell you a little bit of information. I could find none, except for that this was being turned into loft apartments. So you do know that this is an early company, because a lot of the early can companies that made metal products, they got combined. Some of the early ones that made typewriter ribbon tins got combined in 1901 with the American Can Company. So that kind of is hard to track down sometimes, but always look for the maker's mark on the cans because that can help you date it. And of course, you know this is a rocker can now, so you know that it is earlier. And I love the graphics on this can, and I totally think that it's worth the $1,250 because this is just something that you don't see every day. This is another rocker can, and this is a Sinclair motor oil. And this one's a little less expensive, and I think partly due to the fact that it is pretty rough. I mean, at least you can still see the graphics and it displays well, but the opaline is almost pretty much gone from the front of this can. But it's just amazing. This is one that you don't see. This is before the Sinclair dyno, so you can see the difference in logos. And some people may collect certain logos within a particular brand. So they might collect Sinclair. They may just collect the Sinclair dyno. Maybe they just collect early Sinclair. So that is something to pay attention to, is some of the different graphics on the can and how they changed over the time. This can is getting into the quart cans that I was talking about. And these actually have the solder seam. And what's interesting is you'll notice that this listing actually mentions old solder seam. So when you're looking at cans like this, you want to be careful of reproductions. And I'll talk a little bit about reproductions momentarily. But this can here actually has the solder seam on the side. And that's what you want to look for. These early cans have the little wide solder strip made from lead. And you can see where this was punctured at the top. They used, like you saw at the beginning in the Sinclair ad, to actually puncture the can. And it's just got some great graphics. This is for Golden Shell. Now, this gentleman is saying 40s era, and I have to sort of disagree with him on this, primarily because the solder seam was around until the early 40s. And then when the war happened, they started switching to what we call paper quarts, or cans that have a metal top with a paper middle. So I think that this is actually a little bit earlier, but it is a great can. And you'll notice that these little round cans still go for quite a bit of money. So it's not just the size. You know, sometimes people tend to think about prices like, oh, well, the larger can should be more expensive because it's larger. Well, it really is dependent on graphics and rarity. And this can is one that you don't find a lot of. You find some of the newer shell cans going into the 60s. So when you see this can here, it's got some age to it, and it's totally worth its current bid price of $80.26. In fact, I would expect this can to sell probably well into the hundreds, because it's just not one that you see a lot of. And of course, you can see that they punctured it, and then somehow this one just didn't get thrown away. But usually they would just toss these cans. Here's
You've
another.
mentioned that you're going to talk about cardboard cans. There was a question earlier in the chat if there were any glass oil bottles used. And also there's a question from Kirsty Garza. Since these cans are so large, do you ever see any that have been modified into other things back in the day, such as tramp art or a utilitarian piece?
I've never seen anything like that, tramp art pieces with these oil cans, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. I've just never personally seen them. There are types of oil cans where they were never actually folded into a can. So sometimes you will just find the metal sheets with the graphics on them. I couldn't find any actually listed online to show you guys an example of. I wish I did. I looked on several sites and just couldn't find it. But if you find the flattened can with the rivets, it has not been folded into a can yet. And those can be quite collectible. That's something that you want to look for too, is the unstamped cans. Those are pretty neat. I just couldn't find any online, which goes to show that a lot of those are pretty rare.
And collectors would still be interested in that sort of can that hadn't been formed into a can yet?
I think so, because it kind of goes through the history of the can. You know, okay, this can wasn't formed into a can, so we're actually finding like an original blank, which is pretty cool.
Right.
And then when you get into certain graphics, and I keep reiterating this, but that really matters a lot. certain graphics attract people to the cans. I mean, that's why these kind of became so popular in collecting, as people realize that these graphics are just to die for. They don't make things like this now. I mean, our oil cans, we don't have oil cans. We have the oil plastic containers with just sort of boring graphics. They're yellow, they're plain, they're not interesting. But look at this can. It's got air race with a really amazing airplane and some cool fonts and graphics to it. And that's what people love about these things, is, you know, the graphics are to die for. And of course, there's also a thrill of having like a really rare oil can in your collection too, and saying, oh my gosh, I found this, and being able to own it. This one is, I believe, from the 1900s, as this person does advertise, and it's just amazing. Now you can see here, it's got the solder seam down the side. So that's what you want to look for on these little metal round cans, the quart cans. You want to look for that solder seam. That will tell you that they're earlier. Now, they did move away from the solder seam. Like I said, during the war, they went into paper quarts, which are what these cans are here. You can see that they're paper on the side. And then they've got the metal and bottom, metal top and metal bottom. And they did that, of course, to conserve metal during the war because they needed the metal. But this is a Fox head composite can, which is basically like a composite cardboard that they use to make this can. It's got some cool graphics on it. Now, these are even harder to find in good condition because the cardboard didn't survive very well over the years. With the metal, at least, you know, you still can have metal cans, but they'll be rusted and there might be some dents and dings. But cardboard kind of does deteriorate. So when you do find some of these cardboard cans, they can be worth some money depending on how rare they are. And this one just has some amazing graphics. And you can see the cardboard, how it's manufactured. You can see the line in the cardboard. And this one is also another great example of a cardboard can. Now, this is the Pennzoil can, and this graphic here is sought after by collectors. So this one is not as easy to find, and it's in pretty rough shape, but it is going for, and now this one, I think the price is maybe a little bit nuts. I don't think that $1,430 is really what the true value of this can is. Now, it is sought after. I will say that. People like the Pennzoil cans. They like the early ones with the solder seam, but this one is a cardboard, and since cardboard didn't survive, I still think it's worth a couple hundred, if not more than that. But I think 1,430 might be a tad bit out of line, but it is a pretty cool can. The graphics on it are to die for.
Brian is asking if there is any difference in cans from outside the United States. I know Katie's hopefully will be showing a few cans that are for sale here locally in New Zealand.
Yes, we will be talking about New Zealand cans here in just a second. I'm sure that there are different manufacturers from around the globe that are very collectible, and people might collect different cities. That's another point, is that you'll notice on these cans, you see this one is the National Refining Company out of Cleveland, Ohio. So some people may just collect Ohio things, and that goes into the cross collectability as well. When you get into New York, I'll show a New York can in just a minute with the Empire State logo. That is something that will kind of cross collect, because people who like New York might also want that can. And if they want Cleveland, Ohio things manufactured in Cleveland, Ohio, then they might be picking up this can. Now, this motor oil can is my very favorite can, probably ever to exist. And this one just has some amazing graphics on it. Now, this one commands a pretty high penny. And yes, it's worth all of $185. I've seen only 3 listings of this can, one of which I bought, but I was very lucky. The seller had it listed as vintage can, and I bought it for $50, which might seem like a lot, but as you're looking through this presentation, you can see how high some of these prices on these old oil cans are. So $50 was nothing for that can compared to what this can is going for, which is around $100 to $200 in value. But the graphics on this are great. And this is a 2-gallon can, so there are different sizes of cans, and this is the 2-gallon ones. Those are the ones that I collect. I like the 2-gallon cans. This one's got some great graphics on it as well. It's Strata motor oil, and planes are a big area of collecting when it comes to motor oil, is the airplane. So this one's $350, and I totally think it's worth it because Strata is a can that you don't see a lot of. This one and the other can that we just looked at, the motor oil, is from around the 1940s. So you are going to find that these are harder to get. And they're just really amazing. And then, of course, you've got people that collect, like I said, bomber plane memorabilia. So they might also want this can for that reason. So there's areas across collecting.
2 questions coming in. One would be, if you find one of these, and this, oh no, I forgot who asked it. If this comes in from Deanna, if you find one that actually still is filled with oil, is that something you would retain it? It would, obviously we'd have the issue before, you can't ship petroleum, but is it something you would leave alone? And does that increase or decrease its value?
So obviously finding oil cans that have oil in them do increase its value because people want them still full. That is something to be on the lookout for, especially unopened new old stock cans. However, it does make it a problem if you're trying to ship it. Now, when you dispose of oil, that's a whole nother issue, because if you're a reseller, you find an old oil can and you want to resell it and it's filled with oil, well, you can't ship it. So your best bet is to get the most money out of it is to take it to a swap meet or some sort of Petroliana show. But if you are going to ship it, you need to dispose of the oil. And the best way to do that is to call your city, and they have a usually some sort of a hotline for liquids and things that need to be disposed of, and you can take it there to the chemical plant and they will safely dispose of the oil for you. You never want to throw it in the garbage. You don't want to throw it in the of course toilet. You know that's not good places for it. So do call your city and find out how you can safely dispose of the oil, because oil is flammable. So that is something you want to be aware of when you're shipping these old cans. Another great example of a 2-gallon oil can. This is the Co-op can. Now, these are pretty easy to find compared to other cans. This one is more common, but it's still worth all of $175 because this one is in really good condition, and you don't see these in very good condition that often. So this is definitely worth all of the money. And you'll notice on the side here, I wanted to show this can because you'll see that it was available in all of these different sizes, and you'll see the giant 55-gallon oil container that you could buy. And those oil cans are out there. They are expensive to ship. It will cost you a lot of money to ship, but some people like those gallon oil cans, and they're refinishing them to make them into trash cans for shops and different Petroliana type collectors areas. So those gallon oil cans, the large ones, are also collectible as well, and that is shown here on the side of this Co-op can.
I guess a can that's about that size could be turned quite easily into a lamp or something like that.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, it would be. So before we jump into looking at what's down under in New Zealand, I wanted to show this poly can because poly actually wasn't around for that long, and poly gas stuff is pretty hard to find. So the history on poly gas is that it was actually a chain of independently owned stations selling gasoline in California in the teens and the 20s. Poly became part of Wilshire Oil in Los Angeles during the Depression, and Wilshire was founded in 1910. And so poly gas stuff can go for quite a bit of money. And this can, even in this condition, is still at $107 in a current eBay auction, because this is something you don't find. Anything poly related, you want to be on the lookout for. But just be aware that there are reproductions of this kind of thing, and you can see where they've punctured the top of the can. But this is one of those old solder seams. Now, they never reproduce the cans I have personally seen with the solder seam. So if you find the solder seam, you do know you've got an original. So just quickly showing here, this can, this is the Empire State can, another one of my very favorites I actually own. And this has some great graphics to it. And this would be an area of cross collecting when you get into the Empire State, New York kind of thing, because you've got the Empire State Building, but you've also got some cool airplane graphics here and motor oil cars on the bottom. So it's just really some amazing, amazing graphics on this can, and it is very cool. Now, Empire State cans are a little bit easier to find. They're like the Co-op. They're not rare, but they're not common either. But they are out there. So if you do want one, you can find Empire State cans.
It's been asked in the chat, Katie, what actually started your interest in oil cans?
That's a great question. I have always been interested in advertising. There's something to me about the graphics and the way that they advertised back in the day versus they do now that just really is amazing to me. And I love all things rusty, crusty, and dusty. And I love having all these antique advertising pieces in my house. So when I discovered that oil cans have some pretty cool graphics on them, that definitely was another collection that I had to start. And it started all with that Empire State can because I love New York. It's my favorite city. I got the Empire State can and it really sent me down a whole rabbit hole. And I thought, oh my gosh, look at all these cans. They're just amazing. So I had to have them. So this is an original Penguin motor oil can. And Penguin is one that you don't see a lot of. It's very rare. And this one you can see even in that condition is selling for $899.95. And these are just the prices listed on eBay, but I do think that they're fair because Penguin is just one you don't see a lot of. And it's the only one listed that I've seen. And there was no solds that I could find. So there's Penguin. There's Star, another great can, but just trying to show you that in this condition, they can still be worth some money because they're just impossible to find. So let's take a look at some of the cans that you're going to see in New Zealand. This is one of my favorite auction sites for New Zealand. Nate, can you tell us a little bit about Trade Me New Zealand?
Well, Trade Me is the New Zealand version of eBay. And I did hear some statistic a while ago about the amount of people in New Zealand that have used the site Trade Me in comparison to using eBay. It's incredibly popular, more popular than Facebook Marketplace. As I said, more popular than eBay. It's everyone's go-to marketplace here in New Zealand.
That's amazing. And you really do find some great things. I was looking here at this Esso can, and I love Esso motor oil, but I've never seen this one with the car and the little oil droplets as faces. I think that this is just great, Nate.
It's a really cool can. I've actually never seen that particular brand before myself, so it's new to me also.
I'm glad you said they were oil drops. I thought they looked like lemons.
They do have a little bit of a lemon design. Now, this one is sold, so I don't know what price. I think I had seen earlier that it, within New Zealand, I think it sold, that's the shipping. We were looking at this can earlier, and I do believe that it was $89. Was that right, Nate?
I think it was $95.
$95.
Unfortunately, with Trade Me, unlike eBay, you can't search for sold items unless you've actually saved this item into your watch list. You'll then see what it's sold for, but unfortunately, you can't do a search on sold items.
Well, it is still a very cool can and one that we don't see here. This is strictly related to New Zealand because I see Esso cans, but I've never seen this particular can, so I don't believe it's something that you would find in the United States. And this is something...
I'm pretty sure that was $95, and that would equate to about $67.50 US.
Oh, cool, Nate. That is just awesome. Thanks for the conversion. Now, we were talking a little bit about Caltex before the show, and this is something that I don't recognize. I know Caltex and the Star, of course, but I don't recognize this can. So is this something that's quite common in New Zealand?
I think so, and I think this green and white, this green stripe on a white background was the signage used at Caltex stations here. This looks very, very familiar to me. So I think that here in New Zealand, there must have been this green and white type of color range for the Caltex company.
That is fantastic. So Trade Me New Zealand has a lot of great oil cans on their site. So if you guys get a chance, go to Trade Me New Zealand and look around and see what kind of things they have. I really think that that's amazing because there's just something different than we have here in the States. Now, I want to talk about this, Nate. Speaking of New Zealand, this is something that Nate found in New Zealand. And can you tell us a little bit about this? This is kind of relating to the oil cans and Petroliana in general.
I was watching an episode, it could have been a live, of George the Antique Nomad, and I think he came across something that was a mobile product with the Pegasus, with the red Pegasus, and he said, look out for anything with a red Pegasus because the market really liked it. And while it was on, I flicked into another window and searched Trade Me, that's where I bought it, for Pegasus, and came up with this, which I bought, which I think, you know, from memory, it cost me about 15 or 16 New Zealand dollars. It's a label from the 1950s for petropine mineral turpentine with the Pegasus on the label. It's a paper label. It's quite small. It's only about, I don't know, 5 by 5 inches.
It's a great label. And you're right, the Pegasus is very collectible. As you saw in the first video I showed of Bill's collection from the HGTV video, he had a lot of Pegasus, of course, mobile oil stuff. And that's very, very collectible. So you always want to look out for that Pegasus because it will be quite hot, I think, going forward. I don't think the market is ever really going to drop on the whole collecting of the mobile Pegasus. It's a great piece you found there, Nate.
Well, I'll be sending that piece to you. That'll be my gift for you, for your collection. So you'll have to watch out for that in the mail.
I absolutely love that, Nate.
Sorry. One of the questions, it was mentioned in the chat, but also because you're talking about the Pegasus in New Zealand, when you get into the international versions of some of these, do you find that people are trying to cross? Somebody mentioned that the Caltex looks a lot and is probably somehow related to the Texaco logo here. And I know that Rick's Rustic Relics just added, happened just today, added a Texaco, but a Canadian Texaco. Do people want the international aspect, or do people tend to collect a very specific definition of their label or of the company or of a specific era of that company?
I think it's sort of a mix. You know, as you saw from the collector Bill at the beginning, he collected everything mobile related, and it wasn't anything specific within the area of collecting mobile. So there are people that just collect mobile things in general and all things related to mobile or all things Petroliana that they can find. And then there's people that are more specific, and there probably are collectors that just want the Canadian cans versus the US cans. I think a lot of the cans and Petroliana in general, when you get into more of the other things you can collect, like the signs and the map carriers and the oil racks and that kind of thing, very much equate to the whole feeling of that US feel, that American feel. So I think sometimes people may be more interested in things that are American made because it goes with that sort of Americana idea. But I do think that there are collectors for different logos and different things. And some people want a whole history of a company. So they want the earliest version of the Texaco Star versus the new version. Same with Standard Oil. You know, Standard Oil changed over the years and they merged, and there's a whole history to Standard Oil you can look up. It's quite complicated, actually. But some people want Amoco, and then some people want Standard Oil. So it really just depends on the collector. But there is value pretty much for everything, I think.
I think a few people in the chat have been talking about the old self-service, the old full-service station, where you would go in and get your oil checked and your wiper fluid fulfilled, and someone would pump your gas. When I was young, about 15, maybe 14 or 15, I had a weekend job at a service station. I would pump gas and check oil and windscreen wiper fluid and wipe windscreens. I mean, I didn't know a car from a ride-on mower at that stage. And I do remember a guy coming in with a very flashy looking car, and asked me to fill it up. And I went to the Bowser and I pulled the pump off, and I couldn't find the place where you put the petrol in. And I walked over the other side of the car and I couldn't find it over there either. And I put the pump back into the Bowser, and I must have walked around this car 3 times before I looked up, and he was laughing and he said, "It's behind the license plate." And I have no idea what sort of car it was, but yeah, lo and behold, where you put the petrol was behind the license plate. And I think he probably had a good laugh at every petrol station he went to.
That's something that you probably aren't used to, so I could see where that would be confusing. What a great story, Nate.
Thanks.
Now, this is a great website, and this goes into doing some more research on cans. This is Antique Advertising. I mentioned them before. I love their website. This has some great graphics on it, just some cool vintage eye candy. But one of the great uses of this website is not only to see what some of the auction prices have sold for in the past, but it really does give you some idea of cans that you might want to collect, because, you know, some of these cans are so rare that you're not going to stumble across them maybe on eBay. You're not going to stumble across them on Etsy. So going to this website and getting some cool look into great graphics and cans that aren't usually found might add some cans that you can want to collect in the future. So here's a great rocker can here. This has, of course, the Bengal Tiger, and this is it's sold for $4,830.
Wow.
And of course the graphics are great. So this is something where this is pretty pristine. When you talk about oil cans, you know, there's still some rust and dings, but this oil can is in pretty good shape. So the Bengal Tiger motor oil can is pretty awesome. And I love that it's a rocker can. So this has some great graphics. And of course, it's a great way to look up some cans that you might want to start collecting in the future. So highly recommend this antiqueadvertising.com. Now, as we start closing out the show here, I want to talk a little bit about, of course, reproductions, because when you get into advertising, there can be a lot of reproductions, and that's one of the things that you want to be really cautious of if you're a collector, because if you like advertising like I do, you want true original. Now, there are some people that just like the graphics, and so they're happy to get a reproduction and put them, hate the word man cave, but, you know, you see sometimes these advertised as like reproduction for man cave, you know, that's kind of where those kinds of people might come in and buy some of these reproductions, but they don't really have a lot of value. And for us collectors out there, they just sort of flood the market, and they're not something that we're looking for. So one of the reasons that I wanted to show this is there's a lot of reproduction cans listed currently on eBay. Now, they are taking some of the harder to find graphics and putting them on cans. So if you just like the graphic for $11, I mean, that's not a bad deal, but it is a reproduction. And one of the ways you can tell that it's a reproduction is notice the manufactured rust. They have made this can look old. So you can see that there's a lot of rusting here, but it's not true rust. It's just sort of like a fake rust color. You'll also notice that this can does not have, any of these cans have that soldered strip on the back. So that's a great way to tell that this is a reproduction. Now, they did make cans without the soldered strip that are metal, but they have a little metal seam. And those, of course, came after the war, when they didn't need them, there wasn't a shortage on metal. So they did make some of those cans, and you will find them, but you can easily tell that that's a real versus a reproduction, because these ones don't have any seam on them at all. And this one clearly has some very fake rust on the top, and it's not really well done. So that is a reproduction can, and there's quite a few of them. Rocket is another can that you will see reproduced a ton, because this particular Rocket oil can is extremely hard to find. The last one that I saw sold for $350, and that was a 2-gallon oil can. So this one here is reproduced, and you can just tell the fake rust. It's not done very well. They've done some fake puncturing on the top. And of course, anyone can take one of these cans and leave them outside for a few hours in the rain and then let them rust. So that's just something to be aware of. I do like that this gentleman, though, does mark them as reproduction. So you'll see them marked a lot of times as reproduction. You'll also see vintage style. That's another word you want to be on the lookout for with some of these old oil cans. Vintage style typically means it's not legit. It's not a real can. And this one, I mean, the top is so new. There's no way that this is an original can. And you can see the paper label.
Katie, I'm sorry, but for the ones that you showed earlier with the manufactured rust, is it a case where, like you said, if somebody was trying to fake it, they could just put it out in the rain and let it rust? But would this rust be in the exact same location on every can they made? So if you found pictures of multiple listings, would it always be like a line right down through the E or whatever? Is it manufactured in that way where it's printed on?
You can see here that the rusting is in the exact same spot on the Rocket can as it is the Power Lube, and the same as it is on this can up here with the poly. Now, the Texaco one that they've made here, they've added a little bit more printed rust to it across the top, but it's very similar to the poly can. Now, I think to get the top looking old, they've either used a spray paint, that there is a spray paint that's rust. You can get like a rusty texture spray paint, or they have actually left an old can in the rain, or they found an old can and just put a new label on it. So just be aware that those are out there. And a lot of times they will take these graphics, like the poly graphic, and put it onto a reproduction sign. So there are a lot of reproduction signs, and that's a whole nother topic when you get into Petroliana. That's the broader category. We're talking more about oil cans, but there's a lot of faked signs out there. So you want to be aware of that.
So now the next one that you showed, that one does look really shiny. Even Pat Peterson said, that just looks way too shiny. But aren't there people that will actually take rusted or, vintage cans and actually recreate them? So it's the original can, but all the art's been redone, or the decals have been redone, so it looks brand new.
There are people that do that kind of thing. They will take the can, strip it down, and then put a new graphic on it. I have seen those online, but they always usually will mark them. Sometimes they don't, though. So it's where your eagle eye really comes in, learning about looking, especially with these quart cans, looking for that strip on the side. This one doesn't have that early strip. It doesn't have a metal seam on the side. This one obviously is newer, but with the rusty ones, you just want to look for those details. Now, I've never seen the 2-gallon cans. As I showed earlier, I've never seen these 2-gallon cans reproduced. So as far as I know, now they could be out there, but I've never seen anyone trying to reproduce these. So usually when you collect these, you're getting an original, because I don't think that they reproduce those. The quart cans are quite popular with collectors because they're small and they're easy, to add to your collection, and you can amass kind of a whole bunch of them. So that is something to be aware of, that these quart cans are popular, and those are the ones getting reproduced.
And Tammy is asking about the value of those. So pretty much what you're seeing here, that $10-11, they're really just sold more as a decorator value as opposed to any collector value.
Right. These are not going to have any type of collector's value. There's going to be a little market for them in the $10 to $11 range, just for people that are like doing decorating. There might be decorators that are, hired to do, and I hate the word man cave, because, these things can be for men or women. I mean, it's just cool graphics. That doesn't have to be that men have to be in the cars and women can't be, but there are people that are hired to do these kinds of industrial spaces, and, for restaurants or for man caves or whatever, and they're not going to spend a bunch of money on an original. So they're happy to pay the $11 to get kind of the look that they want. So yeah, these are only worth about $10 to $11. And to be honest, if I saw one of these at an antique store or a market, I wouldn't even bother picking it up for resale, because I really just don't think they're worth that much, to be honest.
Gina Marie's asking if you've seen any fake rocker cans.
I have never seen fake rocker cans. To my knowledge, those are never have been reproduced. It doesn't mean that there aren't people doing it, but I've never seen it. I usually have only seen these quart size ones being reproduced, and then I've seen the images being put onto signs, like those metal tin signs that you see pretty much everywhere.
How many
Yeah.
cans do you have in your collection, Katie?
That's a great question. I have about 7 cans currently in my collection. They're all gallon oil cans, except for I have one 1-gallon oil can. And I just love them. Of course, I'm pretty selective with the ones I collect because they're expensive and I can't buy every single can that I like. But also, I don't have a lot of room, so I really collect the ones that have the coolest graphics to me.
Right.
Now, as we close out the show, I did want to give you guys some resources if you want to do your own research and your own delve into oil cans and you're starting a collection. You probably want to know, where do I go? How do I get started? Well, go to eBay and start looking up some of these cans yourself, the ones that maybe you're interested in. You say, oh, I like that Empire State can. I might want to add that to my collection. Start there. Go to eBay and see what some of the prices are and just be on the lookout for oil cans on eBay and see, which ones you might want to add. But there's also a couple of other resources I think are really helpful. And this is a Facebook group called Vintage Oil Can Collectors of America. You have to be well, you don't have to be invited, but you can join it by answering just a few short questions. So it is a closed group. It's not public, but it is a fantastic resource for sourcing oil cans. And just if you have questions, you can put it on this group and they're very, very helpful. This is akin to the Fostoria glass groups. I've talked about this before, but if you can get on Facebook solely for the groups, there are a lot of knowledge in these collectors groups and they're really worth joining. So even if you create a fake Facebook account simply for these groups, I highly recommend it. So this has some great graphics. This guy's selling cans here. So there's some to be sold. There's some cool eye candy and just great help for things if you want to post to this group and get some advice. So I really like this Vintage Oil Can Collectors of America group. There's also a few books I recommend. Now, I love Worman's. Anything Worman's does, I'm a big fan of. They have a Depression Glass Guidebook that I've talked highly about. And this is Worman's Gas Station Collectibles. So this goes more into the whole general category of Petroliana, but there is a whole section in here for just oil cans. Now, this one is hard to find because it is out of print. You can see here on this website, they're selling it for $39. There are copies that are not hardback of this book. They're paperback for only $12 on Amazon. So I would go to Amazon and try to find a old copy of this, or eBay. But Worman's Gas Station Collectibles is fantastic. This oil book is by Tom Allen and Susan Allen. Susan Allen is a graphic designer. Tom Allen has been collecting oil cans since he was 12 years old. And they wrote this book. And this book is really helpful. My only problem with this book is it only does the quart size cans. So if you're interested in the rocker cans or the 2-gallon cans, this book may not be for you, but there's some great graphics in it. It's got color photos. I think they said, over 1,100 cans featured in this book. And it's got some great information. Here you can see that strip that I talked about, the seam on the side that you want to look for in some of those earlier cans. So this is a great book. You can pick it up for around $19 online. Got some great graphics. And then another great collecting book that I really like is by Clark Miller. This is Collecting Oil Cans. I think I paid $5 for this on abebooks.com, or Thrift Books is another great site. So recommend this book as well. And then we'll end here. This is a fantastic, fantastic Instagram page. And I wanted to show you this can because this is one that I'm on the lookout for, but it's so rare. I don't think I'll ever get it, but the graphics are to die for. Of course, I love anything with playing cards. And that's another cross-collectible thing. If someone might be interested into poker or to playing cards or games, and they might really want this can for that reason as well. But this is a great page. And this is TNT Petroliana. This guy has some fantastic images on his page. I do believe that a lot of these are coming from his personal collection. He's got the poly can here. Some of them he sells. So you can be on the lookout for this page. It's TNT Petroliana. It's on Instagram. So highly recommend this page. And I'm sure that if you wanted to reach out to him, he would help you out as well. Now, he's from Canada. This gentleman here is from Vancouver. So if you're going to buy anything, maybe it might be difficult to ship to the States. But here's a great Pegasus mobile gas sign. It's an original sign. So he's got some great stuff on that page. So guys, that is all that you need to know about Petroliana. I want to finish off with this great Esso ad from 1951, back in the days when gas stations did more than just had gas. They actually filled your car up, checked the oil, checked the tires, did windshield wiping, and cleaned your car, all kinds of great stuff. And this is a really fabulous ad.
Motor oil lubricates the engine of your car just like water wets your hands. And you just can't buy better lubrication than this oil. It's Esso Extra motor oil. And this oil has something extra. It has a detergent. It bathes your engine every mile you drive. You can see the dirt and gunk come out of the engine when you drain the oil. That's why it's so important to do two things. It's important to use an oil that helps to keep your engine clean. Use Esso Extra motor oil. And it's important to drain away dirty oil every 1,000 miles or so and refill with fresh, clean Esso Extra motor oil that bathes your engine every mile you drive. See your nearby Esso dealer.
So great ad there from Esso. Absolutely love those old advertisements. They're so cool. And here's some more vintage eye candy for you. Another great quart can. So thanks, guys, for tuning in for this show. I really enjoyed sharing with you about Petroliana, and more specifically oil cans, a subcategory of Petroliana. It was so fun sharing these with you. And I hope you enjoyed some vintage eye candy. And of course, we're inspired to maybe start a new collection. Of course, all this advertising can be quite expensive. So I always say that my collections are not your everyday collections. They always are a little bit more expensive. Like, of all the things I had to collect, I had to pick the ones that are pretty expensive and hard to find. But that adds to the thrill of it, the thrill of the hunt, and the joy of owning some of these old pieces. So thanks, Patrick and Nate, for being with me tonight.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank
It's been
you.
really interesting. Really enjoyed it. I know there's a few questions that we may have missed in the live chat. I'm sure if you pose those in the comments after this video posts, that Katie will answer any of those questions. But thank you so much for having me along. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Absolutely. I will definitely answer all those questions down below in the chat. So I know, Nate, you've got a great Instagram account. So if you're not following Soul Nate, you really should be. He's got an amazing IG account, posts some great photos. And Nate just started a collection of Not Gal. So you want to stay tuned, because I think you'll be posting some photos on Instagram, right, Nate?
When they arrive, they have been purchased from Canada and the United States. So it will be some time before they arrive here. But yep, as soon as they arrive, I will be posting some photos.
Fantastic. So make sure you go follow Soul Nate on Instagram. I've linked that down below. Nate also has a YouTube channel, Soul Nate. So make sure you follow him on his Instagram and YouTube. And Patrick, what do you have coming up for the week? You've got a great channel as well.
Well, thank you very much. I will hopefully be dropping a video that I still have to record, but I'm going to be issuing, I haven't done a challenge or a collaboration in a while. So I'm actually going to be posting a collaboration in preparation for my birthday next month. And I will just say it's got your name written all over, Katie, because it's going to involve vintage cookbooks. And, so I will let everyone know in on that. And then coming up on Wednesday, I will be with Katie once again, and we are introducing our new show, the Duo Dive, and that will be hosted on my channel this week, Trusty HUCKSTER Mercantile, and we will be working with Nancy from This Overstuffed House, talking about her rhinestone jewelry collection. So that will be Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on Trusty HUCKSTER Mercantile. And then Thursday will be my standard live sale, which is 8 p.m. Eastern, also on the Trusty HUCKSTER channel.
Wonderful. And of course, stay tuned to all of our Instagrams to learn about our next Tales from the Triptych. We'll be announcing that over on Instagram. So stay tuned for that. And make sure, of course, that you subscribe to all of us and enjoy some of these new shows we're putting out. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to make you smarter, and we're going to learn some more about vintage. So thank you all so much for coming to this episode of Tales from the Triptych, Petroliana version. And I hope, as always, folks, that you will stay in, stay safe, and binge YouTube. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye,
Thanks,
folks.
everybody. Bye.